Mr. Numbervator's last comic book series today. You are now tuned into the Mr. Numbervator show every Wednesday from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. on Chalk Hill Community Radio Station. Let's get mathematical. Hello, good evening and welcome. It is exactly 5:30. It's Wednesday and it's the math show. And you know what that means. It means you've got me for the next whole 1 hour. 1 hour is equivalent to 60 minutes. I can go into seconds, but I won't take you there just yet. But it's the math show, and you know with Mr. Numbervator on the math show, everything that you need to know about maths we cover. So whether or not you think you're good at maths, whether you think you're better than me at maths, whether you want to be better than me at maths, the math show is the place to be every Wednesday between the hour of 5:30 and 6:30 p.m. Chalk Hill Community Radio Station is, as it says on the tin, it is a community radio station. And we believe in keeping the community connected. And my way of keeping the community connected is by teaching maths and making everyone feel that they are good at maths and making sure that everyone can do maths as well. So every Friday between 5:30 and 6:30 on Chalk Hill Community Radio Station, it's the math show, and it's the only math show on the air in the whole of England and beyond. It's the only math show. You've got me, Mr. Numbervator, in the hot chair for the whole next 1 hour. Today's show I have titled Negative Numbers. Why have I titled my show Negative Numbers? Well, a couple of year 9 pupils in a secondary school, they stopped me the other day and they said to me that they were struggling or they didn't really understand what negative numbers was all about, and they were getting really, really confused. And I just said, listen, would you like me to cover negative numbers on my next math show? And they said, yes, that would be helpful. So for you, you know who you are, the year 9 pupils. I'm not going to mention your name. I'm not even going to mention the school that you come from. I'm not even going to mention the area of the school that you come from. I'm just going to say this show is dedicated to year 9s, year 8s, year 7s, year 6s, year 5s, year 4s, and year 10s and year 11s. It's dedicated to everyone who wants to be better at maths and everyone who wants to consolidate their understanding of negative numbers. So, what is a negative number? Well, I'm going to put the answer in a very easy, straight to the point sentence. A negative number is any number less than 0. How about that? That was easy, wasn't it? So a negative number is any number less than 0. That's all you need to know, okay? Now, obviously, there's more to understand with negative numbers, but the most important thing about negative numbers, the key learning, the key understanding, the key concept is a negative 0. So what does a negative number look like? Well, we represent a negative number with a minus symbol before the number, not after the number or the digit, before. So if, for example, I've got the number 10, the minus symbol, the negative symbol, will go before the 1 digit. Because in the number 10, you've got 2 digits, you've got before the 1. And that tells us it is negative 10. And what does that tell us? It tells us that it is a number below 0, less than 0. So we have to go from negative 10 towards 0, and then we start counting our positive numbers. So another way of looking at a negative number is the opposite of a positive number. So can you see how I'm very, very gently revealing and showing you and explaining to you what a negative number is? A negative number is any number less than 0. It looks like it's got a negative sign before the actual number or the digit, and a negative number is the opposite of a positive number.
Now, in the classroom, whether you're in the primary, secondary, college, or university, we all use number lines. Yes, in university, we use number lines. For example, I was in a university 3 weeks ago, and the students there were looking at chemicals, and they actually put chemicals on a number line depending on the strength of the chemical. So number lines are used from the youngest to the oldest student. Okay. Now, if you've got a number line, imagine you've got a number line. The negative numbers will be located to the left of the zero. So you've got so let's imagine you've got a line. You've got a horizontal line that measures 30 centimeters. Why did I choose 30 centimeters? Because 30 centimeters is the length of a normal standard classroom ruler. So all classroom rulers are 30 centimeters long. Why are they 30 centimeters long? Okay, the reason why they're 30 centimeters long is when you're sitting at a table and you've got two people next to each other sitting at one table, 30 centimeters is the ideal length for the ruler, so that each of you have got enough space to manipulate the ruler. So it was designed with a purpose in mind. And also 30 centimeters is equivalent to 1 foot. Now, if I look at my foot, I'm wearing a pair of trainers. A foot is equivalent to 30.4 centimeters. A ruler is exactly 30 centimeters. However, you know in maths, 1, 2, 3, 4, you round down, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, you round up. So if I've said to you 30.4, if we round down 30.4 to the nearest whole number, we get 30. So however you look at it, negative numbers, rulers, and mathematics, they are all connected. They are all connected. So you've got your number line. If you've got a number line that measures 30 centimeters long, halfway is 15. So what you can do is put a little vertical dash halfway along that line, and you can put 0. So you can put the 0, which is for halfway along that line. To the left of the 0, okay, to the left of the 0, you would have your negative numbers, -1, -2, -3, and so on. And then to the right of the 0, you would have your positive numbers, +1, +2, +3, and so on. But when we're talking about positive numbers, we don't say +1, +2, and so on. We only do that if the terminology is really a part of the question. But otherwise, we just say 1, 2, 3, 4, because we assume that they are positive numbers. So that is where you get a positive number. Now, when I sent out my information leaflet to you who are watching, and to the schools and to other people, there was one part of my leaflet which said that I'm going to be talking about the importance and the use of negative numbers in real life. Yes, we do use negative numbers in real life. A lot of young people say to me, why do I need to learn about Pythagoras? Why do I need to learn about quadratic equations? Why do I need to learn about negative numbers? Well, over the past weeks, I've explained to you why you need to learn quadratic equations, why you need to learn about Pythagoras. And this evening, I'm going to explain to you why you need to understand negative numbers. And if I just take something as common and as simple as your fridge, as the fridge in your house, most of us, not all of us, most of us have got a fridge. You've got the top part, which is the normal fridge, and then underneath you've got the freezer part. Yeah, some people have got a separate freezer. I, for example, I've got a separate freezer, but then I've also got a fridge and a freezer as well. Don't ask me why, but that's what I've got in my house, okay? Right, there's a lot of ice creams and lollies in there. Right, so in your freezer, the typical temperature for a normal household freezer is -18 degrees Celsius. Now, when you go home, or if you're at home now, run to the freezer, and there's going to be a rectangular little rectangular box there, and it's going to be red. And inside that box, it will tell you the temperature that is that of the freezer. And that temperature is going to be between, I would imagine, between negative 15 and negative 19. But the optimum, the best temperature for a household freezer is negative 18, because that way the food is kept frozen, and you can keep the food frozen for a lot longer if it is negative 18 or colder. Anything warmer, then when you defrost the food, there can sometimes be a reaction. So everything, there's a reason for everything. And on the math show, yes, I'm teaching you mathematics, but I'm also teaching you about real life. Okay, real life, the application of mathematics to the real world. So your freezer, negative 18. Now, if for example, you leave the freezer door open, that the freezer is going to become warmer. So that means if it was negative 18 and by mistake you've left the freezer door open, then it's going to come to negative 17, negative 16. It's going to start to beep to trigger you. Then it's going to go all the way to negative 1, and then it's going to get to 0. And that's when your food is going to start to melt slowly. Now, when it gets to 0, you then go. That's the normal temperature. Some people like 10 degrees Celsius, but most rooms are about 8. You see, the freezer was negative. That was the perfect temperature, the freezer. And now, because the temperature has risen in that freezing compartment, 18 is 18. And 18 plus 18 is 36. So the difference between negative 18 and positive 18 is 36. And that was a real question that I wrote about 12 years ago for some year 11s. I just said, find the difference between negative 18 and positive 18. A lot of them got it wrong, okay? Towards the actual GCSE. But can you see how important it is to understand what negative numbers are, what they look like, how to read and interpret them, and how to use them? And this is what the math show is all about this evening. So today's math show, Chalk Hill Community Radio, is all about negative numbers, the use of negative numbers, the application of negative numbers. But for me, as Mr. Numbervator, I just happen to love negative numbers because they are so special. And later on in the show, I'm going to be explaining to you why I find them so special. People think that I'm a bit weird, but if you think I'm weird about maths, then you're right. One important fact to mention is this: zero is neither positive nor negative. Have you ever thought about that? 0 is neither positive nor negative, because it's bang in the middle, isn't it? So it's neither positive or negative, it is just 0. So 0 stands alone on its own. Well done, 0. So 0 is neither positive nor negative. And I just thought that I'd put that in there just to get you thinking about maths and number in a more logical way. Why is 0 neither positive or negative? I could spend a whole lesson on that. I could spend a whole math show on why it is, but today is not the day. But if you do want me to go into the explanation of why zero is neither positive or negative, then I can do that. But then we're going into sort of A-level maths and really understanding and making sense of maths. And also, I've mentioned about your freezer in your house. Sometimes all of us, we get into what we call debt, D-E-B-T. That means we are spending more than we have got. Okay? Now, I personally, I can't handle that. It gives me sleepless nights. I wake up sweating about, I owe the bank. So I try to make sure that I do not get into debt. Now, if I have got into debt in the past, when I get my bank statement, having a debt or being in debt, they represent it with a negative sign. So if my bank account is come and it's got negative £20, that means I have not got £20 in my account. It means I owe the bank £20. So the next time my wage goes in, £20 will be taken off my wage to bring my account back into zero. And then from zero, that will be the money that I can actually use. So once again, I'm giving you a real life use of negative numbers. So don't get into negative numbers with your spending. And I'm sure you heard recently that the government, they want all schools to be teaching what we call financial literacy. That means they want all schools all the young people, right from year 4, 8 and 9 year olds, right through to year 11 and beyond, about money. What's the difference between a debit card and a credit card? What is simple interest? What is compound interest? When you want to get a mobile telephone, what is the best tariff that matches your life and your spending? Okay. If you want to get a car and you want to buy a car, then what interest rate are you going to get so that you can buy the car and you can pay back the company bit by bit? All of this is what we call financial literacy. And being in debt is a part of living. People get into debt at different stages of their lives. There's nothing wrong with that, but you must always try to avoid getting into debt. You don't want to see that negative symbol on your latest bank account. So we've looked at what negative numbers are, how they are represented with a minus symbol in front. They are the opposite of positive numbers. They are located to the left of the zero on the number line. And negative numbers can be used to represent concepts like being in debt, and your freezer at home has to be at least negative 15 to 18 so that the food is kept really frozen. And I like my ice creams and my ice lollies to be really frozen. So therefore, I make sure my freezer is set at negative 18 so that when I take my ice lolly out or my ice cream out, it's really hard and I find it hard to put the spoon in there. So I have to end up scraping it and it takes time for the ice cream to defrost. But do you know what? I'm giving you a real life example of what cold is all about. Great. Okay, so we know about negative numbers. And we know that when you go into debt with your bank, a negative number is represented money that is owed. So if you've got negative £20, that means you owe the bank £20. Yeah, it doesn't mean that you've got £20 in your account. It means that you owe the bank £20. So when the next payment goes into your account, you have to clear that £20 first, and then whatever is left, that is your money to use. So be very careful. Financial literacy. We are going to have a math show on financial literacy, and you know that Dean's always in the studio with me, and I'm going to be talking to Dean about putting together a comic that teaches young people about financial literacy, because not everyone knows the difference between a credit card and a debit card. Not everyone knows the difference between simple interest and compound interest. Not everyone knows about how to interpret mobile telephone tariffs. Not everyone knows how to switch their utility, for example, their gas or electric or water, from one company to another company. This is what we mean by being financially literate. That means you understand how to read and interpret numbers. About 3 years ago, I was doing some work in Wormwood Scrubs prison, and I was working with prisoners who were about to be released. And what my job was, I went in there to prepare the prisoners for life outside of prison. So when they were released, they would know where to go and get support from the local authority. They would know how to claim different benefits. They would know how to open a bank account, and then they would know how to keep a record of what they've got in, what they've got out, and how much is left. Because you get money going in, money coming out, and then you know what you've got left at the end of the week or the month or whatever. So, and that went really well. But what I realized and what I saw was that the prisoners, they were really, really, really mathematically astute. That means they knew a lot about maths. And I always tell the same story. There was one 19-year-old young lad in the prison, and he was part of my group, and I noticed that he was really, really confident with maths. So I decided to give him some real GCSE questions, real higher tier GCSE questions, yeah, and I mean iteration, yeah, real hard questions. He walked those questions in seconds, and I mean seconds. He was absolutely so amazing. And I was forced to ask him, how did you end up in Wormwood Scrubs? Because you've got such an amazing brain. What happened? He gave me the story. I'm not going to go into it, but he realized that he slipped up. So the next week I went in, I gave him a real higher tier GCSE paper. Within about 35 minutes, he had answered every single question correctly. And I said to him, look how amazing you are. And if you see the way he put himself nice and straight, he felt so proud. And, all I'd said to him, look, I wish you all the best when you get out. Just make sure you do your maths. If you want to go and do your GCSE maths, you can go and do it at any college. But it looks like maths is your forte. Maths is your strength. I would follow it. So who knows, one day I might be walking somewhere. I could be in trouble. I could be in debt. And he might be there to save me and to help me. And that is what the circle of life is all about. We all help and need each other. Anyway, back to tonight's show, negative numbers. So I've mentioned about debt, negative number. Elevation. Now you're thinking, elevation, right? Geographic locations below the sea. So underneath the sea, underneath the ocean, there are locations and areas and things that are down under the water. And don't forget, the sea and the ocean is really, really deep. Okay, so geographic locations below the sea level are represented with a negative number. And I'm sure you've heard commentators and presenters saying 1,000 meters below the sea level. And that is a negative number because it's under the sea. So you've got -1, which is 1 meter below the sea level. -2 will be 2 meters below the sea level. So can you see SEE, not SEA, but can you see how negative numbers are used in real life? And we use it every single day. The one that I'm sure you're used to is the temperature. Yeah. We live in London, we live in England, and we know what the temperature's like. One day it could be 26 degrees, and then by the evening it's -2. That's just the climate, and that's just where we live, yeah. But temperatures below freezing are expressed as negative numbers. So when you wake up sometimes, let's project to end of January, February. That's when it's usually really, really cold. You wake up in the morning and your mum or your dad or your partner or whoever might say, Guess what? The temperature outside is -7, it's -4. Automatically, you know that it's going to be freezing. You know that it's going to be cold. How do you know? Because of that word minus, negative. Okay? So negative numbers, they are used in real life, and they are used to help us understand about the weather, about keeping food safe, about what it's like under the sea and under the ocean. So negative numbers are really, really, really important. We've also got rules for adding and subtracting negative numbers, for dividing and multiplying with negative numbers. And we are going to go into that later on in the show this evening. But before we go for our quick ad break, I just want to talk to you about some certain parts of the world. I want to talk to you about a place called Moscow, which is in Russia. I want to talk to you about Paris, where you've got the Eiffel Tower. Dean knows about the Eiffel Tower. I want to talk to you about Sweden, and I want to talk to you about New York. Okay? I want to talk to you about these 4 locations. Right. Moscow is a cold country. It's a cold place here. I've been to Moscow, and I'm telling you, it's really cold. Today's temperature in Moscow was -1 degree Celsius. -1. And that's good for Moscow. The temperature in Paris today, this morning, was 3 degrees Celsius. So, but throughout the day, I'm sure it got warmer and warmer, but it started off at 3 degrees Celsius. Now, that is quite chilly. In Sweden, the temperature this morning was -2 degrees Celsius. And in New York, the temperature this morning was 5 degrees Celsius. So my first question to you is this: which of those 5 places, Moscow, -1, Paris, 3, Sweden, -2, New York, 5, which of those 4 locations was the coldest? And can you put those 4 locations in order from the coldest to the warmest? You see, this is what understanding about negative numbers can do for us. And after the ad break, we're going to be looking at ordering negative numbers, comparing negative numbers, finding the difference between negative numbers, and then I'm going to be talking to you about the coldest part, the coldest place on the planet, what the temperature varies, and then the warmest place on the planet, what the temperature is there. And then we're going to be talking about finding the difference between the coldest and the warmest. We're going to go for a quick short ad break. So I'm going to see you on the other side. So don't go too far, and I will see you shortly.
and innovative designs to transform London's junctions, tunnels, bridges and pedestrian areas within the existing road network. A plan that will make travel better for Londoners, however they use the road. To find out more about our plan and how it may affect your journey, search TfL Road Modernisation Plan.
Tokyo Radio.
You're listening to Tokyo Community Radio. Keep the community.
Go to www.sovereigncomicsuk and get your latest issue of Mr. Numbervator's Maths comic book series today.
Okay, good evening and welcome back to part 2 of the Math Show with me, Mr. Numbervator, on Chalk Hill Community Radio Station. So today's show is about negative numbers, and before the ad break, I was explaining to you what negative numbers are, what they look like, where to find negative numbers on the number line, how to read negative numbers, how to interpret negative numbers, and indeed how to use negative numbers. Now, before the ad break, I mentioned to you about 4 locations, four places in the world. I mentioned Moscow, -1 degree Celsius, Paris, 3 degrees Celsius, Sweden, -2 degrees Celsius, and New York, 5 degrees Celsius. And my question to you was, can you place these countries, can you place these areas around the world in order from the coldest to the warmest? So I'm going to do that for you now. Now, I have got a message from a young person who's actually done it. So I'm going to read out to you her answer, okay? And if you want to challenge her answer, then you can let me know as well. You know the number to call, 07535 644 850. I'm going to repeat that, 07535 644 850. So here is the answer that has been sent to me by a year 10 pupil, and she has said Sweden is the coldest because it is -2. It is -2. That means it's more towards the left of the 0. So the further away from the 0, going towards the left on the number line, the further away you are. That means if it's temperature, it's the colder. So -5 is colder than -2. -20 is colder than -10, and it's colder than -2. So that's why she said Sweden was the coldest because it was -2, followed by Moscow, because Moscow is -1. So Moscow is not as cold as Sweden, but it is cold. And -1 is closer to 0 than -2. Then you've got Paris with 3 degrees Celsius, and then you've got New York, which is 5 degrees Celsius. So that is how we can order negative numbers. That is how we can order negative numbers. And I've ordered negative numbers for a real purpose, because these are temperatures of countries around the world. And all you need to do in the morning, if you want to do it, is you can just do a search. What is the temperature in New York, in Paris, in Brussels, in Germany, in Ghana, in Jamaica, wherever you want? And the internet will tell you the temperature, and you can compare them. Or you might do a search, what is the coldest country this morning? So negative numbers are fun. And that's why I said to you at the beginning of the show, I find negative numbers so exciting because you can play about with them and it means something to you. I've written a question. So I wrote this question for you, for my listeners. I wrote it yesterday. I'm going to read it out to you, and then I'm going to answer the question. If you want to call in and give me the answer or send me the answer, you're welcome to. But remember, the math show allows me to talk about maths, to teach you about maths, but more important, it allows me to show you how exciting and how much fun you can have with mathematics. Right, so here we go. What is the difference in temperature between the Sahara Desert, which is normally 40 degrees Celsius hot? Can you imagine that? 40 degrees Celsius. That is the normal temperature of the Sahara Desert, but it can get worse than that. It can get warmer than that. 40 degrees. Okay, so what is the difference in temperature between the Sahara Desert at 40 degrees Celsius and Mount Everest? Mount Everest, which is a very, very popular, important mountain. The top of the mountain is -2 degrees Celsius. So what is the difference between those? What's the difference in temperature between those two places? The Sahara Desert is +40. So that is to the right of the decimal point of the zero. And that is going right down the number line. And then you've got the Sahara, then you've got the Mount Everest at -2 degrees. And that is cold. So you imagine if we're trying to calculate the difference between those two extremes, because 40 is extreme and -2 is extreme, if you start from -2, you have to go 2 steps to get to 0. -1, and then you're at 0. So that's 2 steps from -2 to -1, from -1 to 0. That's 2 steps. Then if you want to get to 40, you have to go 40 steps to the right to get to 40. So what is 40 plus 2? The answer is 42. So therefore, the difference in temperature between the Sahara Desert at 40 degrees Celsius and the top of Mount Everest at -2 degrees Celsius, the difference is 42 degrees. And that is how you solve a real question. With me, I try to make maths accessible for everyone, and I try to make maths friendly because I don't want you to have a fear of maths. Yes, I know there are maths questions that even stop me. There are maths questions that I've got to sit and think, oh my gosh, how do I answer this question? I need to get help from this person. I need to read this book. I've got to go on the internet because I'm still learning. And there's always going to be someone who is better than you out there. There's always going to be someone who is going to challenge you in whatever field you are doing. So this is what we call learning. And on the Math Show, it's all about learning, but it's all about learning with excitement. It's all about feeling comfortable, being in a safe space, and enjoying your learning journey with me. Okay? So the difference in temperature between the Sahara Desert at 40 degrees Celsius and Mount Everest, the top of Mount Everest at -2 degrees Celsius, the difference is 42. Why? Because from -2 to 0, you've got 2 steps. And then from 0 to 40, you've got 40 steps. 2 plus 40 is 42. So that is the difference. Right. Earlier, I said to you, I'm going to be talking to you about the world. And I find this next part of the show it's going to be really interesting. The coldest place on the planet, that is our planet where we live, okay? The coldest place on our planet is the East Antarctic. The coldest place on the planet is the East Antarctic. And can you guess how cold it is? The temperature in the East Antarctic. Now, you know that Antarctica, the Antarctic is really cold. But the East Antarctic is -94 degrees Celsius. That means when you breathe out, your breath straight away freezes. That's how cold it is. So to go there, you have to be wearing special equipment because our bodies cannot function there. -94 degrees. Do you know how cold that is? Even in London, Even in where the radio station is, Neasden, when it's -7, everyone is moaning. People are wearing boots and gloves, and they're wearing mouth muffs and whatever you call them, balaclavas, because it's so cold. That's -7. Imagine negative -94. That is really cold. So that is the coldest place on the planet. The warmest place, the hottest place on the planet is a place in America. It's a place called Death Valley. I wonder why it's called that. It's called Death Valley, and it's in a place called California. And the temperature, the highest temperature is 56 degrees Celsius. 56 degrees Celsius. I'm even puffing and panting and sweating when it's 32 degrees. I've just come back from Ghana and it was 35 degrees there. So I cannot imagine 56 degrees. But that is the temperature of the hottest place on our planet. So my question to you is very simple. What is the difference between the coldest place on the planet and the hottest place on the planet? I've just made up a question on the radio, but it's a real question. What is the difference between those two extremes? Well, it's relatively easy, to be honest, because if East Antarctic is -94 degrees Celsius, you have to get from -94 to 0. That means that is 94 steps. So -94 to 0 is 94 steps. Then from 0 to 56 degrees, that is 56 steps. So the difference between those two extremes must be 14, 15. It is 150 degrees. That's the difference of the temperature between the hottest place on the planet and the warmest place on the planet. Now, I find that interesting, yeah, because I haven't been to the East Antarctic. I haven't been to Death Valley in California in America, but one day I'd like to go. But I don't think I will survive very long in a tracksuit top and tracksuit bottoms when it's -94 degrees Celsius. I think there could be something that's going to happen to me. So I'll need to make sure I'm really, really, really well wrapped up and insulated, because I know that when I've watched TV programs, people who go to these really cold countries, as they're breathing, their breath straight away turns to icicles. So before the breath even comes out of the mouth, it is frozen. So that just shows you how cold it is. And that, because we're using negative numbers, it allows us to have a mental idea, a mental picture of how cold a place is. Okay, let's go on to some everyday uses of negative numbers. As I said earlier, your household freezer should be about -18 degrees Celsius, okay? That is the right cold temperature for a freezer. So if you've got your chicken, your vegetables, your meat, your fish, you put it into the freezer, it's frozen, and it lasts for a lot longer. That's -18. Now, about 3 Decembers ago, I went to a place called Bayswater, Queensway, and there was an ice rink. You can go ice skating. And I just asked the people who organized and who were running the ice rink, how cold, or what is the temperature of the ice on the ice rink? And they said to me, Geezer, they called me Geezer, the temperature is -8 degrees Celsius. Now we know what when something is frozen, we know what that is. So -8 degrees Celsius, you know that is really thick ice. So an ice rink, the temperature there is -8 degrees. Some of you might like going skiing. I've been skiing twice. It's a lovely sport, really exciting, fell over 1,000 times. but that's part of skiing. Now, when you go skiing in a country like Austria, the temperature there is usually about -6 degrees. So it has to be that cold for the snow. So you can actually ski on the snow. So I'm just giving you an example of how negative numbers allow us to mentally have an idea, of what the temperature feels like, even though we're not in that particular part of the world. Okay? The coldest temperature in England that has ever been recorded. Now, this is exciting. This is exciting. The coldest temperature in England that was recorded, and it was recorded on January the 10th, 1982. Now, some of you listening weren't even born then. You were up in the sky ready to come down. Some of you were not born then. But in 1982, I do remember the big freeze. It was called the Big Freeze. And the temperature in England plummeted. That means it fell to -26 degrees Celsius. Can you imagine England, London, with that temperature, -26 degrees? There'll be a lot of complaints. Schools will be closed because the pipes are all going to burst, okay? Central heating bills are going to go through the roof because it's going to be really cold. And there's going to be a lot of sales of gloves and hats and scarves and whatever. But that is temperature. So today's show, what I've done here is I've painted a picture of what negative numbers, what they look like, what they mean, how to use them, how to read them, and how to interpret them. Because negative numbers are part of our everyday life. We've all thankfully got a fridge and a freezer, okay? And we all go to that fridge or that freezer several times a day. But do we check the temperature? Not always, okay? A lot of us go skiing. A lot of us go ice skating. A lot of you travel around the world. Some of you might have been to California. Some of you might have heard about Death Valley, okay? A lot of us do get into debt where you've got more money going out than you've got coming in. So negative numbers allow us to make sense of number and to appreciate and to understand number. There are some rules for when we are adding and subtracting negative numbers. So I just quickly want to go through a couple of the rules, and then we can always pick up the other two, maybe next week or on another show. When two signs, like negative and a positive, or positive and a positive, negative and a negative, negative and a positive, yeah? When two signs are written next to each other, there's a rule that we use to help us make sense. If the two signs that are next to each other are different, they become negative. For example, if you've got a positive next to a negative, that equals a negative. If you've got a negative next to a positive, that also equals a negative. The best way of me explaining what all that means is a family friend of mine is an electrician, and he's always telling me that when he's wiring, he has to be very, very careful of positive and negative, because if he wires it wrongly, he could blow a house up. So negative and positive, you have to know how to read them and interpret them. So a positive and a negative result in a negative, and a negative and a positive result in a negative. Two signs that are the same and they're next to each other become a positive. So for example, a positive and a positive results in a positive, and a negative also results in a positive. And you need to understand these rules, especially when you are calculating with negative numbers and positive numbers. So for example, I've made up a question. 3 plus negative 2. 3 plus negative 2. So because you've got the plus and the negative next to each other, the positive and the negative become a negative. So 3 plus negative 2 really means 3 minus 2, and so the answer is 1. Isn't maths amazing, eh? Isn't maths? I just taught you something, and we're using it for a real question. And what about this next question? 3 minus positive 2. 3 minus positive 2. So you've got a minus and a positive next to each other. They're different. So a negative and a positive result in a positive. So that question really means 3 minus 2, which is the answer of 1. The same answer as before. But now look at this next bit. My next question is 3 plus positive 2. Now, what did I teach you earlier? A positive and a positive next to each other result in a positive. So 3 plus positive 2 really means 3 plus 2, which equals 5. And then if I've got 3 minus negative 2, so a negative next to a negative, 3 minus negative 2 really means 3 plus 2, and that also equals 5. So you've got rules for when you are adding and subtracting with negative numbers. And when it comes to multiplication and division with negative numbers, I'm going to be talking about that on one of my next shows. But for today's show, I wanted to make sure that I give you enough so that you can go away and you can make sense of it. I don't want to bombard you or give you too much so you're thinking, oh, what did he say? I didn't quite understand. I've given you enough, and I've made sure that I've given you real life examples, and I've painted a mental picture of what negative numbers are all about. I want to finish off my show today because when I was coming to the show this afternoon, there's a secondary school round the corner from where I live. And when I'm walking, because I like to be healthy, so when I walk to the radio station in Neasden, as I'm leaving my house to walk to the studio, the young people are coming out they're coming out of school. And there's a couple of I know quite a few of them because I've either taught them in primary school in Brent or I know their parents. So a couple of them stopped me. Oh, Mr. Numbervator, I remember you. You came to my school when I was in year 5. And then before I knew it, there's a crowd around me. So I had to explain to them where I was going. And I said that I'm going to the radio station to teach maths on the radio. And one boy said, why do I like teaching maths on the radio? And I thought that was actually quite a very sensible, intelligent question. Why do I like to teach maths on the radio? Why have I got a maths radio show? And as I was walking, when they'd left me, I've given them my autograph, obviously, but when they'd left me and I was walking on my own, I was thinking, Isaac, Mr. Numbervator, why do you like teaching maths on the radio? Well, here's the reason. I know that not everyone likes maths. That is a fact. I have to accept it, and I do understand it. Okay? I don't like every other subject that is taught on the curriculum, but I do like maths. So I understand when people say to me, I don't like maths, and so my job is to turn that opinion around and make them like maths. So why do I like teaching maths on the radio? I know that not everyone likes maths, and I know that not everyone is able to engage in the classroom with a teacher when it comes to maths. I know that there are some people who are conscious that they're not good at maths. I know for a fact that there are some people who fear maths. When I'm teaching maths on the radio, unless you're watching me on the live broadcast, you can only hear my voice. So that straight away takes away any worry or fear that I might see you not being able to keep up with me, or you not understanding, or you getting the wrong answer, which is never a problem. So that's one reason why I like teaching maths on the radio. Another reason why I like teaching maths on the radio is because you can be walking and you can be listening to the math show. You could be in a car driving and you could be listening to the math show. So that means I am able to reach a lot more people than if I was in a classroom or if I was doing a seminar or a workshop. That's two reasons why I like teaching maths on the radio. And the third reason is because the radio, you've got the TV, you've got the radio, you've got the internet, you've got computers. The radio for me is actually quite exciting because it's live. And I've got to be really careful that I don't slip up or I don't say the wrong thing or I make a terrible mistake. So by me having to be aware of all of these things when I'm on the radio, that is what makes live radio for me really, really exciting. So the young people who stopped me outside their school this afternoon, maybe you're listening, but I will be passing on the link to your head teacher who was by the zebra crossing, making sure that everyone crosses the road safely, because there's no more lollipop man or lollipop lady. So I will give the link to the head teacher, and then maybe you can listen next week. You can even call in and ask me a question. You can even ask me the same question. Why do I like teaching maths live on the radio? Because I thought that was a really, really good question. So I've answered your question. I've given you 3 reasons, but there are more than 3 reasons. But they are the 3 reasons which mean a lot to me. Okay, we're coming to the end of the hour. We're coming to the end of the math show with me, Mr. Numbervator, on Chalk Hill Community Radio Station. Today's show was about negative numbers. So we're looking at what negative numbers look like, how to use them, how to read them, how to understand them, and how to interpret them. I've given you some real life use of negative numbers, like the freezer, going to a cold place, a cold country. And I've made negative numbers less frightening for you this evening. Okay? So I really hope you've enjoyed the math show on Wednesday today. And I very much look forward to seeing and working with you next week. You know what to do. If you want to send me a message, I know some of you send me balloons that go up when I put my phone on. If you want to send me a message, the number to use is 07535 644 850. I'm going to repeat that, 07535 644 850. You can always send me a message, a text, email, or whatever. And yeah, I look forward to working with you next week. Today's show was about negative numbers. Thank you very much for listening. And thank you for tuning in to Chalk Hill Community Radio Station with me, Mr. Numbervator, and Sovereign Comics. Have a lovely evening. Bye-bye.